Right, good afternoon. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to present this joint paper today, and I think the presentation comes nicely, I hope, after this excellent lecture of Professor Collier in the morning. We'll be touching upon a few of the matters that he already mentioned. And it's a great honor of me to have this opportunity to speak today while Professor Karima Kourayem is the chairperson of this panel. And celebrating the 25 years of ERF brings memories to one's mind. This reminds me of the fact that the first 3 people I worked with as a research assistant happened to be women. Very powerful women, no need for empowerment. Professor Karima was one of them. Professor Heba Handousa was another, and my great late teacher, Professor Hana Khairuddin, with the third. So I'm just discussing that in the context of interesting debate about gender and role of women, which we're going to be touching upon here as well in this survey, and based on a questionnaire that many of you participating today in the room participated in it one way or another, including ignoring it as well because it's lengthy, as some of you mentioned. But at least we had a look on this questionnaire. And why we started this piece is basically to test one of the old arguments by Keynes about role of ideas. It was not just Keynes who, in one of the most quoted words of his, were talking about the ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. And he had this interesting debate in that paragraph: is it vested interest or ideas, or perhaps something else that dominate the formulation of public policy? And then Hayek, his kind of intellectual rival, they may have disagreed on many things, but one thing they agreed upon, again, is the issue of the importance of ideas and knowledge, and whether we have the right knowledge or claim we have it, or perhaps we don't have it, which may cause catastrophes. This chart here, and you'll feel very much that this presentation that I'll be sharing with you with my colleague Rana, who is sitting here for some reason that I'm not under my control, but I think it's because of shortage of space and her insistence to sit there. But she will be asked to share some of the aspects of the paper today. This part, I think, we started from an excellent book by Roderick on economics and economics rules. And he started it by those 2 great gentlemen, Bob Shiller and Fama. And both of them, as you know, they received the Nobel Prize of Economics in the same year. One of them is claiming that markets are efficient, and the other is claiming that they are not. Can they both be right? So I took it further. Now we have James Tobin, a great mind, a Nobel Prize laureate, and Milton Friedman. Again, they had very interesting debates for many years, and both of them, the question there again, would they both be right? And then going up in the ladder, not necessarily through the affiliation, but Hayek and Keynes and, of course, Adam Smith and Karl Marx. Can they all be right, these schools? It's not just, the importance of the topic here is not limited to the economists and the economic profession, because sometimes when economists tend to write accessible books, like the very famous book, I would say, Why Nations Fail, or another one which is not as famous, but written by a good friend of mine, Peter Blair Henry, they have completely different approach on how to reform and support development. One with emphasis on institution, which is the one by Acemoglu and Robinson. And the other one by Blair is just telling us that it is very much leadership and policies in institutions do not matter that much. And this is a quote from him directly. When I invited him with Kaushik Basu to the bank to present his book, he said, no, they don't really matter. It's policy and leadership. Look at Lee Kuan Yew and what he did in Singapore. Of course, institutions came late. There are other versions, like Small is Beautiful, a very famous book in the 1970s. Now, if you check some of the bookshelves in airports, you will find Big is Beautiful. So are we confusing the public, or there is something else? And I think in a very interesting piece by Skedelsky, a book that was just published a few months ago on money and government, I think he points to many important things about comparisons between economics as a science and natural science. And one of the things that we cannot really have substitute, that one theory cannot really kill the other when it comes to economics, unlike in physics, for instance, or natural science. So you cannot really see a claim by one school of thought that really gets rid of another. So the possibility of coexistent schools and ideas at the same time, unlike classical physics and quantum physics, you will find very competing ideas and are in coexistence. And you can always claim that there are tests, but we know, I think by now, that tests are not final and they are partial and they happen after the event in some particular circumstances and contexts. You can always claim that what failed in some circumstances may prevail in another. So here the issue of the fact that we cannot really deal with economic theories and models as rivals. It could be better to see them as a portfolio of models and schools of thought, as emphasized again by Roderick. But why we choose particular topics? John Hicks, back in the day, mentioned something about concentration of attention. When you have higher employment, like the interwar period, the interest would be on unemployment. If you have stagflation, there will be some shift of interest. But in all times, as John Stuart Mill emphasized, that one of the biggest and disputed questions have been always about role of government in the economy and its dealings with the rest of the agency, including the private sector, public sector, and now coming strongly to the discussion is the role of society. If you had an opportunity to see some of the good books about society and role of society in economic development. What we're discussing today in a way is not very new. In an excellent book by a Dutch economist, Klamer, he had interviews with a number of leading economists back in the 1980s, the who is who at the time, Lucas, for instance, Townsend, Sargent, John Taylor, Marxist economists as well were interviewed, like Brunner, and he summarized the discussions as those people are the best that we can get, and they don't agree much on anything, including hypotheses, policy proposals, and they even have difficulty understanding each other. I think there might be some improvement in that. People have some sort of convergence of ideas over time, especially after the financial crisis. This is a very simplistic way on how ideas could influence policy making. These are different classifications, very simplified. Liberalism versus socialism, and the different affiliations comes under that. You would assume here that there are three channels based on some good work by Hirschman and Bob Burham, that, and this could be of relevance to the ERF as well, that economists may enjoy some sort of professional authority in the society. They may have some institutional positions, like having economists as advisors or ministers, or in some influential boards, like central bank, or actually the very language that the economists use, like incentives, trade-offs, opportunity costs, they dominate the discussion in that way. And then through their positions in research centers, universities, and media, they can influence public policy. So comes this matrix that we designed based on the work by Chang. And here he puts 9 different economic schools of thought, from the Austrians to the behavioralists, to the classical, to the Marxists. And here you can read this matrix from anywhere you would like. You can say, well, I'm a devout Austrian, I don't really belong to any other school. Austrians are my gurus, my gods. So in this case, if you follow that kind of logic, the kind of understanding of different important questions on viability of capitalism, or understanding economic systems, or issues related to technology and productivity might be harmed by this kind of focus on a particular school. And then following Chang, you might be better taking a kind of a portfolio of schools of thought and reading matters here by rows. So if you want really to have good understanding of unemployment and recession, and you don't have time to go all schools literature, you may need really to consult the classical, the Keynesian, and that could be sufficient, at least partially. Or the existence of corporations. You can go through that. Actually, this kind of work is not for the professional economists, who should be at least encouraged to go through every discipline, but this is for the non-economists. So I'll go through that very quickly. Policy making and stages of policy making. So there are 6 different functions for economic policy, from fiscal to monetary, to issues related to legislation, international cooperation, managing crises, and we have very many of them, and even production of goods and services. These are the 6 areas that are summarized by an excellent book on economic policy by Benasinker, and a few other co-authors with this author. You can take it in stages of intervention. If you are an economist with idea and you want to make an influence as a political entrepreneur or an agent of change, as mentioned in the first session today. So you have different 5 opportunities, from pioneering the idea to influencing the parliament, that is if you have one, or a functioning one, that you can really discuss that with the bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy at the end of the day is going to be the agency that takes all of these laws to implement them and to influence the feedback. So there are many opportunities, and there is an excellent piece by the economic historian Max Hartwell, who had described the different ways of doing that. So bringing that a bit to life, Karl Marx and his impact on the formation of the ideas of the policymakers of the Soviet Union cannot be disputed, unless you want to save Karl Marx from major failures. Keynes and his impact on the Kennedy tax cuts that were continued to be implemented by Johnson. These were very much Keynesian ideas. It took like 3 decades until they penetrated the system and to convince the US administration that this is a good idea. Changes in tides are very important. You need really to have that in mind. In her memoir that I read a few times of Madame Thatcher, she mentioned that she read Hayek when she was in school in Oxford. One of you may wish that she may have read something else, but well, she read Hayek, she was influenced by his work, and that was her book of reference when it comes to economic liberalization and privatization of the British economy. stagflation and the role of Friedman, and I was very much interested to listen to the idea of China and how it progressed, but it's very much the model of Singapore that influenced China. It may not really be an economist in this case. It was a leader in the person of Lee Kuan Yew, who convinced Deng Xiaoping in a very famous visit to China in the late 1970s to embrace their model. There are more specific ideas of economists that influenced not just the economic debate, but economic policy. The role of Ricardo in the repealing of the Corn Laws in England in the 1840s. Laffer Curve and his impact on the Reagan tax cuts. Even most recently, dealing with austerity measures that have been accepted across the parties, regardless their doctrine and their beliefs, Republicans or Democrats, Conservatives or Labour in the UK, they adhere to these austerity measures. More of these ideas, Keynes and White, the very establishment of the global economic system in after the Second World War, Vickery and his pioneering pricing of congestion, a great economist, and he solved problems of congestion, and Levy with the conditional cash transfers in Mexico. These were good ideas, or some could claim, and if you want to have a list of bad ideas, you can consult a very good report led by Professor Mike Spence and Bob Solo, and was happy to be one of the commissioners, and we listed 12 bad ideas, and some of them, I bet, many of you would say it's very hard to get them from there, but some of you may claim that some of these ideas are not really bad. So dealing with joblessness by relying on the civil service, banning exports, exchange rate misalignment, open-ended protection for infant industry, the list goes on like that. And there are other examples which are basically more not just of bad ideas, but economic catastrophes that came out from bad ideas, including the UK or Britain's return to the gold standard based on bad advice or bad consultation that involved Churchill and Keynes, in addition to the Bank of England and the UK Treasury. And it's very important to read this book by Grossman, because sometimes it's not just ideas and sharing them. I think some of the commentators said that Keynes failed in the argument because he had a bad day. He had a very good idea of the merits of not going back to the gold standard, but he didn't really have
10 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so 10 minutes, strong warning there. Rana, please be prepared in your fast, speedy way of explaining things, because the model will come in a few seconds. So there are good ideas, bad ideas, and we have the disagreements among the economists. There is an excellent survey on the UK economists, 1,000 economists in their case, asking them about things that could be very much fundamentally argued for or against through our own economic models, like the very existence of Phillips curve, which we asked you about, whether the relationship between unemployment and inflation exists as in the negative way as put by Phillips, or the impact of minimum wages or ceilings on rents. And you can see the disagreements not just among the British economists back in 1989, or in Canada, or in Switzerland in 1984. You can see the disagreements. And we conducted a survey of 13 questions that Rana will explain to you, and I'll come back in a few minutes just to capitalize on whatever she is going to say. Rana.
So hello everyone, I'm really glad to be here and to share with you this work. So just to follow up on what Professor Mahmoud has just said, that one of the main objectives of this study is to try to understand what exactly shapes economists' ideas and opinions. And of course, we're interested in doing this on economists of this region. And to do that, we had to collect our own data. So we conducted an online survey that probably most of you have received, but many of you have not responded to. This questionnaire consisted of 29 questions, basically asking questions about some demographics, of course, to try to understand a little bit about the background of economists in this region. But the most important part of this questionnaire was about opinions of economists on particular economic policy issues. So these are what we call the 13 famous questions in our survey. So we were able to receive 163 responses, and I'm taking this opportunity to thank the ERF team, but also the teams of the Middle East Economic Association and of the World Bank to help us diffuse this survey as much as possible. And I have to say that 50% of our responses are from ERF affiliates. And then when we collected this data and started analyzing it, we felt the real need to complement this data with qualitative data or face-to-face interviews with leading economists from the region to try to understand many of the findings that we found in the survey. So we did also, in addition to that, conduct these interviews with 20 leading economists, most of which are in this room. And we asked them very similar questions to the ones we asked in the online survey. So what I'm going to do now very quickly in 1 or 2 minutes is just to give you a very quick idea about the basic descriptors. So 70% of our respondents were male economists, 66% of which are academic. And then we can even compare between a generation of economists as we do observe their age. And then we started asking in the questionnaire a question about what is the main reason for studying economics, and we do that also in the interviews. So from the questionnaire, we find that most of economists in this region choose economics or choose to study economics out of pure interest in the topic, but when we conducted the interviews, the responses were slightly different. So they were mainly about reasons related to country or regional situation, or the influence of teachers, which is a very good news that teachers do influence the field of study that we choose. And then for the question about the school of thought, or the different schools of economic thought, so as you can see, and this is a bit contradicting with what Professor Mahmoud have just showed, that 60% of economists in this region consider themselves to belong to a particular school of thought, and only 25% could say that they don't actually belong to any school of economic thought. And when we look deeper at those 60% who think to belong to a particular school of thought, you can see the diversity. So we do have, for example, 8% of our sample who consider themselves Keynesian or new institutionalists and others. Now, the majority are enjoying economics, and this is the most important part.
No,
so,
why don't you do the problem?
Okay. Okay, I just need to talk very quickly about these 13 questions because we consider these questions as the most important part of the survey, because these are the ones who give us the views of economists on particular economic issues and particular economic policy issues. Okay. So I'll move to the probit and then I will go back to that. So basically, in addition to these that Professor Mahmoud will talk about, we did also some empirical analysis. So again, we wanted to see what are the variables that matter the most when it comes to shaping economists' ideas. And a major finding was that no particular school of economic thought seemed to shape the economists' views. We also found that gender matters. So, for example, just to give you an example, we found that women or female economists tend to agree more with cash transfer policy or cash transfers in general more than male economists, and there may be explanations for that we can discuss hopefully later. Also, studying economics in the US and Canada seemed to matter. So those who study in the US and Canada seem to think differently from others. Academic economists seem to are more likely to disagree with the role of corporate social responsibility. Senior economists are more likely to be involved in policymaking, and this is expected. And one thing that maybe some of those in this room might be interested to know, that ERF affiliates are also more likely to be involved in policymaking. Thank you.
Right, excellent. All right, under this strong leadership of Professor Karima, we have to make some changes. So these are the 13 questions, and as you can see, some of these questions really test the textbook models, from are price ceilings on goods and services beneficial, to imposing minimum wage mean lower employment, is monetary policy dominated by fiscal coordination. The famous claim by Friedman is inflation primarily a monetary phenomena, and the list goes on and goes on. And here we put 4 categories. In what areas economists agree on? I would say that they agree on areas that are not really very much necessarily supported by theory, could be more supported by common sense, like antitrust, consumer protection. They agree on the importance of that. Whether corporate social responsibility has an important way in development. Economists would say, why not? They may. Thank you. Cash transfers. Here you can really see some sort of tension between economists, whether cash transfers are better or in-kind transfers. The public enterprises, as a person who was responsible for the public enterprises and investment for a while, I can understand some of the tension, definitely. It's almost divided, almost divided. And then we have fixed exchange rates. For those of you affiliated with the IMF one way or another, you can really see that there is moderate agreement on this. But there is, in all of these questions, I like always to refer to this, it depends. It depends. There is no yes, there is no clear no, it depends on the context. Budget deficit, are they bad for economic development? Moderate agreement on this. Of course, if you ask this question to the group of IMF economists, you know the answer, but even the World Bank, we are in agreement on this. But when it comes to the region, there is this kind of yes, no, it depends. And then disagreements. Price ceilings on goods and services, are they good or bad? Some of them say yes, no, it depends. So minimum wage mean lower employment. Some agree, some disagree, and then it depends people. Again, I think Professor Danny Roderick will be very happy with this, because he spent some time at the LSE explaining that in many of these questions that are settled in our classrooms, when it comes to policy, it very much depends on the circumstances. If your employer enjoys monopoly power versus competitive markets, the issue of of putting a minimum wage makes a difference. So here I would appreciate, of course, that it's not really an easy craft, going back to the terminology of Keynes, that it's a craft based on science. Is monetary policy dominated by fiscal conditions? I'm aware from one of the great economists we have here that there is a book in the making on the monetary and fiscal policy institutions of the regions. I look forward to that. I doubt if we have any monetary policy effective in many of our countries, but the dominance of the fiscal conditions have been very much aware, and my 60-second warning came now. Inflation, primary monetary phenomena. Mr. Friedman may not be very happy with this. Again, but the question has some room for it depends, because an economist will answer you back, is it in the short term, mid-term, or long term? But we were not really that specific deliberately. And Phillips curve, is it alive or well? You can really see disagreements on this area. And tariffs, and again, I refer to Roderick on this. So let me just wrap it up very quickly without really undermining the importance of the interviews. Main challenges: demography, governance, youth unemployment. Main solutions: common sense, common education, governance, and, to my happiness, stable, inclusive financial system and macroeconomic stability. And then the rest goes on. But this will tell you, even when you ask economists, please get me 3 answers to the economic problems of the ERF region, they cannot agree on 3 or 4, but there are some dominating aspects. And this is a summary of all tables. In the third knock, I'll be out. And then I just need really to leave you with this. And this could be the most controversial matter that I like to leave you with. Keynes was expecting economists to be professional dentists. Mr. Friedman, when he was accused, why you are a leader of liberty and freedom, why you are advising an authoritarian regime, he would say, well, you shouldn't really be treating me different from a physician. Roth is talking about economists as engineers. Mankiw is talking about them as economists and engineers. And the great economist Duflo is talking about them being carpenters, more in detail than the engineers. This is an issue of ethics, and perhaps in the Q&A session, I may have an opportunity to come back to this if I have another life after that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.